724-561-3295 or 724-651-1403.
When you talk about community involvement and safety, the name Fry stands at the forefront in Beaver County. Fry Transportation's mission is to continue to raise the bar as the gold standard in their industry by providing the safest, most reliable, and cost-efficient transportation service in Beaver County through their strong relationships with their communities, best-in-their-class drivers, equipment, and technology. There's nothing more important than the safety of their students, employees, and community members. Fry Transportation, where the quality of their organization is characterized by the makeup of the individual behind the wheel.
You're listening to 99.3 FM, presented by St. Barnabas, in addition to 1230 WBVP Beaver Falls. Welcome to the Best of Beaver County, presented by St. Barnabas, a weekly segment dedicated to putting the focus on the amazing things and the amazing people behind them in Beaver County. The Best of Beaver County is sponsored by and content is provided by St. Barnabas. The show airs every Thursday from 11 to 11:30 on WBVP, WMBA, 99.3 FM, and Facebook Live. Now, with no further ado, let's welcome host Mike Romai to introduce today's program.
Good morning and welcome to the Best of Beaver County on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. I'm Mike Romai, and our guest this morning, you know the name because the name has been around since the late 1800s, 1885 to be exact, the William Murphy Funeral Home in Rochester. And to my right is Rick Murphy. He's fourth generation Murphy. And to my left is Brian Murphy, who is fifth generation in the funeral home business. Good morning and welcome to both of you gentlemen.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure, but it is something that is synonymous with Beaver County, the William Murphy Funeral Home. I said 1885. Rick, if you'll take us back a few years and tell us about, was it your grandfather, your great-grandfather?
It was my great-grandfather was William Andrew Hartzell, and everybody knew him as Andy. But that was in 1885. He and his brother Henry came down from Zelienople. Originally, they were from just south of Zurich, Switzerland, and the whole family came over and had a farm.
That's just right down the road from Zelienople, though,
yep.
isn't it?
Yep. Hartzell School Road is where the Hartzell farm was. Uh-huh. And he and Henry came down and started the undertaking and furniture business in Rochester and Freedom. And my great-uncle Henry ran the Freedom store, and my great-grandfather Andy started the Rochester store. And my great-grandfather married a girl from Zelienople, Matilda Zahner, and her father was Edwin Zahner, and he was a funeral director. He was a cabinet maker and also undertaker, as what they referred to them back then. Now, so actually, we have 6 generations in the funeral business, but 5 in Rochester.
Just in your answer, there are so many questions that just came to mind. First of all, furniture business and an undertaker. I guess pine boxes, right, back in the day?
Yep.
It would all come together?
That's where it evolved from, because you had cabinet makers, furniture makers. They all made caskets at one time, and so it kind of tied together. The service part of it, evolved. Actually, it was right after during and right after the Civil War, an embalming and really caring for the deceased at the family home, began. And then it evolved, down through the years to where the undertaker was asked to come out to the house, prepare the body. A lot of times the body was embalmed and prepared right at the house. And then it kept evolving and moving on to more service provided. Our funeral home, it was built in 1900, and my great-grandfather bought it then from a fellow that was building it. He started it in 1895. His wife died during the construction, so he didn't want to stay there. Sold it to my great-grandfather, and that was my great-grandfather, great-grandmother's home until in the late 30s started to be used as a funeral home because everything was in the family home to that point. And that actually continued, used the funeral home or the family home, continued right up until the early 70s. When I first started, we had 2 home layouts, still. And after that, you just didn't see it much after that at all. It was all within the funeral home.
Your great-great-grandfather married a girl whose father was also an undertaker.
Correct.
How did that come together?
He was a cabinet maker and undertaker.
Yeah.
With the evolution of the American way of death is what occurred. And the funeral director became more involved as a funeral director as the years went down, as well as an embalmer. My great-grandfather actually took a course in Pittsburgh, which was the Oriental School of Embalming, which was one day. It was a traveling course. We have his diploma at the funeral home.
Yeah, but I guess your great-grandfather and great-grandmother would have had a lot to talk about. They would have had a lot in common.
Oh, yes.
Both their families were into the business.
Yep, I'm sure that they did. My great-grandfather, I can remember I was 4 years old when he passed away. And I can just remember him at the funeral home up in his bedroom, laying in the bed sick. And that's my only memory of my great-grandfather.
I have pictures of great relatives when they used to have the funeral at the home, in the parlor, in the front, in the living room, wherever it was. And it was surrounded by flowers and all that stuff. I guess the flowers were meant at the time to keep the smell away or something before embalming
well, it was still a remembrance. Embalming was in existence then.
Yeah.
There were different methods, of embalming at that particular time. And the over the years, that all changed. I can remember my dad telling me my great-grandfather was really upset when they bought the first embalming machine, for the business.
Yeah.
And because there was gravitation method, there was a squeeze ball method, overhead, to force the fluid into the body, and then it was evacuated the blood and everything into a jar. And then that was disposed of as waste. But all of that changed throughout the years.
It's interesting, the changes that you're talking about. When you talk about having the funeral at the person's home, the Jewish people refer to it as sitting Shiva, I believe, and the Irish have their wakes, and so everybody had something different. Where somebody had to sit in the room with the deceased overnight because they were afraid. There were a lot of superstitions that came about back in those days.
Right. Yeah. A lot of the symbolic terms that you hear today came from the Irish. Came from
they were a superstitious bunch.
Right. Well, you had a lot of the fellas would go to the town drinking and whatnot. Of course, they used pewter mugs, which has lead in it. So they would either pass out intoxicated on the way home, or they actually died. So they would find them in the road. They would take them home, lay them out on a table or whatever, and wait to see if they woke up. That's where the term wake came from. So they had the wake.
Yeah.
And then they would take the body to the church.
Yeah.
But everybody by that time, a lot of times, were so intoxicated, the priests finally ended it about 40 years ago. They said, no more wake. We're going to have, at the home, if you want to have friends there, and then come to the church. And then, of course, at the cemetery, the graveyard shift. That came from the fellow they would hire to sit there at the cemetery, and there would be a bell attached to a string that went down through the coffin, attached to the finger or toe of the deceased in case they woke up. The bell would ring, and immediately they would call for the assistants to come out and dig up the grave and get the person out of there, hopefully in time. But that was where the dead ringer and graveside shift came from.
And so the guy was so intoxicated the night before, they just didn't, it took him a while to sleep off the hangover.
Correct.
And he rang the bell in the morning.
Yeah. And I can remember Brother James, who was at St. Cecilia's then, he was from Ireland. And he told me then, that goes back to the 70s, he said the priest finally said, no more wake.
Yeah. I used to, WMBA used to be a station in Ambridge, and there used to be a guy who, dinner or breakfast at a local restaurant, and he was called Digger. His nickname was Digger because he was a grave digger. He was, before backhoes and all that stuff. He was one of those guys.
Well, you still have the Young Funeral Home in Butler, and Mr. Young, his nickname was Digger.
Okay,
it was Digger Young.
Yeah.
And he was very involved with the Masonic Lodge in the Syria.
Okay.
Syria Shrine.
When did the term undertaker go out?
Well, in some instances, you still hear that term, okay? But it was the fact that you undertook the responsibility of taking care of the deceased. And then it became, as things evolved, you became the mortician and embalmer. And then funeral director, because you had, the directing of the funeral as well as the practical side of it. And funeral director pretty much took over. I would say probably back in the 60s.
Yeah.
Now my son Brian, he could probably tell you more on that. As far as the evolution of that name, from undertaker on.
Okay, funeral director, and getting involved with the different aspects of it. Because I can remember when I was young and we had relatives who passed on, we would go to the funeral home 3 days. We'd have them laid out for 3 days, and it was you go the first day, and then you go the second day, and you go the evening hours, and then on the third day, you had a little service, and then they went and buried them. Nowadays, it just doesn't happen like that anymore. So the evolution from the time 1885 to your dad's time in the 70s to your time now, there's been a lot of changes in the business.
Yeah, there have been a lot of changes.
Yeah. What are some of the ones that have been talked about over the years? And as you sit down with, do you call them clients? When you sit down with clients,
families.
Families, and you say, well, what would you like? Do people even ask for 3-day funerals anymore?
Not anymore. I think they've all gotten used to the concept of everything happening in 1 to 2 days. I think that's evolved due to people have moved. They leave the area they were raised in,
right,
and set roots up somewhere else. And then their family passes away and they come back to their hometown. They don't have much of a connection there. So they just want to give their family member the proper send-off, which ends up being 1 to 2 days.
And we're so busy, not only are we spread out all across the country.
Everybody's doing their own thing, kind of moving at a faster speed, and just want things to...
We had a hard enough time going from either 2 to 4 or 7 to 9, but now it's pretty much, shrunk down to what are common hours nowadays?
Usually 2 to 4, 6 to 8.
6 to 8.
If they want to break it up and go in 2 different sessions, or they can go straight through, usually 3 to 7. Something like that. Give the family time to meet and greet the public, the people that want to come in and pay their respects to their family. Then they can get out of the funeral home at a relatively decent hour, get something to eat, and get prepared for the next day.
Okay, we're talking with Rick and Brian Murphy from the Murphy Funeral Home in Rochester. Now, I've done something in my life that nobody before me has ever done. I got into this radio business. When my kids were young, I used to bring them to the radio stations all the time, and they'd sit there and watch me do a radio show. Where there's nothing exciting about sitting here talking to yourself doing a radio show. So neither of my children got into the business. In your business, it's been handed down now 6 generations. From your great-grandfather to your father, you decided to get in it, and then, Brian, you decided to get in it. How does that happen?
Well, backing up to you with the radio, you don't give yourself enough credit. The creativity of being able to sit there and discuss things and think of things to say when, you're not getting, and necessarily at times, any feedback.
Yeah,
so
right,
that's a tribute, to you people that are in that profession. Myself, I was in high school, I think a sophomore, and my dad came to me and he said, "Do you think you'd have any inclination of continuing and going into the funeral business?" Because if I said no, he had already made arrangements. He was going to move the family to Scottsdale, Arizona, and where we had relatives out there, and there's a funeral home that still exists out there. It's Murphy Funeral Home. So he had contacted them, and he was going to work for them. And I said, yeah, I think I would. So I went to college. I graduated from Wittenberg University, which is a liberal arts school, and it kind of gave me a background, smattering background into a lot of things, because this is a multifaceted profession. You have a little bit, of psychology, as law, practical side of it with anatomy, and then dealing with people, being able to have the personality to sit down and talk with people. So it's multifaceted. It's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none possibly, or maybe one area master of. But I told him, I think I would like to do that. So after I graduated from high school, went to Wittenberg, graduated from there, and then I went to mortuary school. And I graduated from there in 1971 and 72 then, after going through a resident internship and taking the test, the national exams and whatnot. I was licensed in 72. So, and I enjoy, working with the people and trying to help. It's a service, that we provide.
Sure.
And that's the emphasis that I like to put onto it.
Many times you see people at their lowest point in life, the survivors.
worst point.
Yeah, worst point. We're going to pick it up at that point when we come back from a break. This is the Best of Beaver County, St. Barnabas Radio Network. We're talking with Rick and Brian Murphy from the Murphy Funeral Home in Rochester.
Falling in love is one thing. Having anxiety about falling is a whole different subject. If you or a family member are concerned about falling, and yes, either up or down the stairs, or maybe even out of bed, St. Barnabas has a special message and some ideas just for you. Years of experience in working with people who are prone to falls has given St. Barnabas special expertise in this area. Call them at 724-443-0700 and learn about ways that you can begin to feel more confident and safe, including suggestions that you can implement right now into your daily routine. Call St. Barnabas at 724-443-0700. For many years now, St. Barnabas has been helping people fall, in love that is, with their new, better life, a longer life, a risk-free life. Call St. Barnabas now at 724-443-0700 or visit stbarnabashealthsystem.com and learn more about living longer and better.
Best of Beaver County on the St. Barnabas Radio Network. I'm Mike Romai, and we're talking with the Murphy Funeral Home, the fifth and sixth generation Murphys. Kevin and Brian are with us. Brian is Kevin's son. This is Kevin over here. This is Rick. I'm sorry. Rick over here, Brian over here. And so they're the fifth and sixth generation in the Murphy family. And Rick, you were just telling us about how you got into the business. Now, what year did you graduate high school?
66.
66? Rochester? You were probably the only person in that class that went into the business.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you built the family from there. You built the business up, the changes that you went through in terms of how you run the business. And Brian, we'll get into that with you as well, because you have ideas. You probably had ideas when it was handed down to you. And I read an article about you where your dad never had a vacation, because it was an all-consuming business that you were in. And so at one point he handed you the keys and said, we're going on vacation. And I think something similar is happening with you as well, Brian, and the fact that as a funeral director, funeral home owner, you don't have days off.
That's that's correct. When you have a small business, and you need to be attentive, to it. Now I'm fortunate I have Brian, that I could take off. It just depends upon a lot of other factors. My wife and I last time we were away was, I think, 6 years ago, for a week. And before that, it was in 2007. And then prior to that, it was probably about 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
So it's hard to do that. Now, my dad, as you said, he and my mother put me through school and everything. And my mother would always say, because I could be ornery at times, and my mother would always say, that when I graduated from high school and I was out of the house, her work was done. So they needed a break when I graduated from college and was in mortuary school. Correct, my dad handed me the keys. He said, we're going away for a month. It's on you. And then my mentor at that time, because I was a resident intern, was Jim Todd, old Mr. Todd, who was a gem of a guy. And so he would come over, and mentor and help me and whatnot. So I did have help at that time. And down through the years, we've had several people in the community that worked for us that helped also.
Yeah.
But it is hard to get away.
Brian, See, ornery?
Yeah, that's one word I would use. Yeah.
I thought I noticed a little bit of grumbling over here whenever he said that. But how did he talk you into, why did you want to get into this business?
Well, my path was a little bit different. It wasn't as smooth as my dad's. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober now for 20 years. So that played a huge factor in determining what my future was going to entail. Coming out of high school, I went to college.
Now, you went to Beaver, correct?
I went to Beaver High School, yes, sir. Went to Beaver High School, graduated in 1992. Then I attended Geneva College for about 2 years. Then we parted ways. I wasn't ready really for anything.
Finding your path at the time, yeah.
Still dealing with the alcohol issue and things like that. And then finally, in 2004, I had enough of myself. I needed to get some direction in my life. I needed to get sober, and I needed my dad's help. So we had, a long discussion, and the business at that time wasn't ready for me, nor was I ready for it. I wasn't going to go into a business that my family had worked for years to establish and create a good reputation, a good name, and I just wasn't in the position to come in and be a part of that at that time. Okay. So I got sober, got myself straight, worked for about 4 years. I always worked. I was always functioning and working, but just not with my family at the funeral home. But after about 4 years, my father and I had a conversation. He had seen some improvement. I had seen a lot of improvement, and we thought that I was ready to take on the responsibility of going to school and joining the firm, which I went back to school. I was 38. It was a 2-year program, so I was done right around my 40th birthday, and hit the ground running, and he's had my back, and I've had his ever since.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Now, did you find, as far as going to mortuary school and all the other things that are involved with it, was it a difficult path, or growing up in the business, did you see a lot of this?
Oh, yeah. Growing up in the business, I was around it all day, every day. So I had a background in it. I just didn't know that I had it. I had it, in my subconscious. It was always there to call on if needed. But then after I went to school and really got involved and saw the way he worked and the way the industry was working, I just fell in love with it. And just love dealing with the families, giving them a memorial that they can remember and be happy with.
Wonderful. I knew Park Lutton in Beaver Falls, Lutton Funeral Home, and they used to live on top of the funeral home. Correct. And people would say, "Wow, how could you do that? How could you?" And it was always like, "Well, the dead don't bother you,
right?
So, you don't have anything to worry about with the dead."
No, it's the live ones.
Yeah.
We had a housekeeper from 1930 until 1985, and people would ask her that because that's where she was, above the funeral home, and she would say the same thing. Yeah. It's not the dead that hurts you.
Yeah. And what is it like? I mean, first off, somebody calls you. They trust you. And it may be the name, 5 generations, 6 generations. So they're calling your funeral home. They're calling the Murphy Funeral Home, not this funeral home in another town. It's coming to you. Whether it was somebody had recommended you, they spoke for you, or it's just a hometown thing. That's why they come to you. What is the responsibility that you have? Because as we said before the break, you're seeing them at their lowest point. Their loved one just passed on. It may be a child. It may be somebody, where we always say went before their time, or maybe somebody who is older, who you're expecting that person is going to die. But you have to talk with the family about that. So someone that you really have no connection to, you have to have empathy and sympathize with them and convey that kind of feeling to them, to know that their family member, their wishes are going to be carried out.
No, that's correct. And it's an adjustment period. As I tell families, this is not something that you are going to ever forget. You're adjusting. And it's not telling them, but it's our responsibility to help them in that adjustment period. To be able to face and realize that, yes, death has occurred, but then in the living, our life continues on. And there's that period of time when we are with that family that we try to make that adjustment as easy as possible. And there's a lot of things involved in that, with helping them with their economic situation, with their insurances and just a whole variety of things that our staff works with families diligently on and helping them through that. And, there's also, one of the facets when you were talking about families coming back to us and trusting us, there's another area of our profession is the artistic area. We do our best to try to bring the person back to the way that they were when they were well as best as possible, and that they look good. And that takes an artistic ability, and it takes time. That's the biggest factor, is the time, which we're willing to do. And that's part of the adjustment. When a family walks in and they see their loved one in the casket, yes, they understand the individual has passed away, but the look, the repose, comforts them. If they don't look good, then really there isn't that much comfort there psychologically. So we know that's the value of that psychological effect, and we really strive, and we have, from my grandfather to my dad to myself to Brian, which he's terrific, with restorative and cosmetic work. And one other thing I want to interject with my son, I'm very proud of him. It is not easy to get over a compulsive behavior. When you have alcohol or drug abuse in the family, people that have had that, they know what I'm talking about. But he made a courageous turn in his career, but also in his person. And I think his wife deserves a lot of credit. And it was the birth of his son that also, corrected. And he also, I think, really returned back to his faith, which really, really, helps an individual. It's a disease. When you have a drug or alcohol abuse, it's a disease, and it takes a lot of courage to turn that around, and I'm very proud that he did that.
And it's continues to be, from what I understand, a day-to-day. Everyday struggle. That's something that you have to...
I don't know if I'd call it a struggle, but it's definitely an adjustment.
Something
and
that's
life
always
change.
there.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the look, the cosmetics, and so I'm picking up. You're part psychologist, you're part spiritual leader. Now you've got to work wonders with makeup and hair and things like. Because that's one of the first things people notice when they come into the funeral home. It didn't look like him. Right. He didn't look like that. Oh wow! They were miraculous in how they fixed. She looks just like she did. How do you do that? I mean, where do you learn all this stuff? It's just from a picture. They send you a picture and they say, "This is what we want her or him to look like."
I think you've got to. The individual that's preparing the decedent has to care, has to really care and want to make a difference. Anyone can go in there and throw on some makeup and things like that. It's the little things, I think, that bring it all together to make the family satisfied and happy.
Yeah.
But back to your original question earlier, when you were asked about funeral director, I take the term funeral director literally. I think we need to be the direction in the family's life at that point in time. They're going through a horrible time. They've never experienced a loss in their family, so really don't know, which way to turn. So we direct them the whole way through the process and try to make them comfortable and give them a memorial that they can remember.
Awesome. What do you want in our final moments here? What do you want people to know and take away from this program about the Murphy Funeral Home?
Well, I think it's how much we care to take care of people. I was born and raised in the community, so I'm 76 years old, and almost everybody in the community, I know or know of, and I understand that they're trusting us with their loved one. So it really is meeting the responsibility of that trust, and the service that we provide is the most important thing. And when you look at it that way, as you said earlier, spiritual leader, because there is that side of it. We're trying to, help people, and I try to, help people to remember their faith. Trust in God. That's where they'll find their comfort. By returning to or having their faith and committing, to their faith. God reaches out to us. May not be exactly what we want at that particular time, but stay with it. And that service and consideration for family people is what drives me and always has.
Wonderful. And website where people can find the information.
Right. It's William Murphy Funeral Home, Inc. at Verizon.net or just .com.
Mm-hmm.
And our email is different. It's WMurphy Funeral Home, Inc. at Comcast.net.
And are you both, and we just have a few seconds left, both confident in going into the future now that you've gone from the 5th generation to the 6th generation,
Very.
that the William Murphy Funeral Home in Rochester is going to be there to serve people for a long time to come?
As far as we plan, yes.
All right.
You know,
We're
COVID
not
changed
going
a lot
anywhere.
of things in people's direction.
It did.
And we've had to work with that and help people through that, especially with time and whatnot. Sure. But we're here, we're going to be here, and to serve our families.
It's great to know. Rick Murphy, Brian Murphy, thank you so much for being
Thank
with
you.
us today.
Thank you.
On the Best
pleasure.
of Beaver County on the St. Barnabas Radio Network, I'm Mike Romine. We'll talk again next week.